Flag. I'm your host, Jack O'Lind. I'm an instrument-rated pilot and the owner of an aviation company and flight school here in Central Florida.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not guaranteed to be accurate or complete. While we research each topic, we are humans and occasionally make mistakes. For the most up-to-date information on regulations, check out the official Federal Aviation Regulations, also known as the FARs, or consult an aviation attorney. Lastly, the opinions expressed on this podcast are the guests' opinions and are not necessarily the opinions of the host or podcast. Welcome to this week's episode. I'm once again joined by my brother Matthew. And for those who hadn't heard our other episodes with Matthew and I are two of the three owners of O'Lind Aerospace, a flight school here in Central Florida that is a tailwheel first flight school. All of our airplanes are tailwheels, two of them. And even though almost all flight schools in the US right now rely on Nosewheel, we've decided to go the tailwheel route, even though we're marketing O'Lind Aerospace as a general flight school, not just a tailwheel endorsement flight school. And we did that for a couple of reasons that we wanted to get into today. But before we do that, first we'll talk about the differences between tailwheel and nosewheel planes. You might hear the term conventional gear used for tailwheel. Is there another word for nosewheel other than tricycle, and then tricycle for nosewheel? So the most obvious difference is the conventional gear or the tailwheel has the two main wheels in the front and then a little wheel in the tail. And then the tricycle gear or the nosewheel configuration has the two main wheels a little further back and then a little wheel in the front. So how are they different when it comes to handling, like flying, taxiing?
So in the air, they're both airplanes. In the air, they're pretty much the same. On the ground, much different because on the nosewheel, the center of gravity is in front of the two main gear. The two main wheels where all the weight is supported. And what that does is the center of gravity is self-stabilizing. So if you turn on the ground a nosewheel plane, and you stop turning, the center of gravity wants to bring it forward and straighten out the plane. So if you initiate a turn on a nosewheel and then just let go, it wants to straighten out. With a tailwheel, because the center of gravity is behind the main wheel, once you start turning, that center of gravity is now turning. It's unstable. It's like if you load a trailer incorrectly, or it's like if you try to push a shopping cart backwards. You push really hard and it naturally wants to swivel 180 degrees. That center of gravity, because it's behind the main wheels, wants to naturally get in front of the main wheels. So it wants to spin you. So it's your job on the rudders to keep it in line. So that's why it can be a little more challenging. It doesn't self-correct when you taxi. It actually self gets worse. If you like jab full right rudder and let go, it'll start turning to the right and it'll actually accelerate. The rate of turn will increase as you turn to the right on the ground.
And yeah, that's a good point. So the tricycle gears are inherently stable while taxiing, while conventional gears are inherently unstable while taxiing. And so if you're just taxiing straight, in theory, it should be fine. But of course, it's not like perfectly straight. The taxiway might have little bumps or changes in elevation. There could be a slight crosswind coming from one side.
That's the big thing. In crosswinds and tailwheel planes and crosswinds, the weather raning effect where they want to point into the wind, because they're able to push the back, right? You have your big tail surface and the wind can push on the tail surface and try to weather vane you, is very pronounced. It's why those crosswind corrections are like super essential.
Yeah, you're always getting on to me about the crosswind corrections when taxiing, which I need to do better. So yeah, when you're taxiing, especially in a crosswind, whereas you can be a little bit lazy on the pedals in a nosewheel plane and a tailwheel plane, all these little tiny deviations, like Matthew said, will explode and become big deviations if you don't get on them fast. So if the plane is just ever so slightly off to the left, you have to give it right rudder and vice versa to keep it centered. So your feet are constantly like playing a game of cat and mouse, trying to keep that tailwheel just centered between the two mains, right? Basically.
Yeah, because we always say if the center of gravity gets outside of the two main wheels, that is when a ground loop happens. Because once that center of gravity is outside of the main wheels, it'll just go and take you for a ride very quickly, so there's nothing, it's kind of unrecoverable at that point. So you got to make sure you just keep that center of gravity and that tailwheel in line the whole time.
So what is that critical point where a ground lift can happen? Is it when the center of gravity goes just outside of the mains? Is that point? Is
yeah,
it
I don't know the exact physics, but yeah, roughly it's how it's taught and how I teach is you want to try to think of keeping that center of gravity inside of the wheelbase of the airplane.
Okay. So you said in the air they're identical.
Yeah, and another thing on the ground too is a little different. Is nose wheels are a lot more intuitive for like our car-based society. You steer from the front of the airplane. So if I want to go right, I steer right. The nose goes right. On the tailwheel, it's a little different. If I want to go to the right, I steer right. The nose doesn't necessarily. The nose goes right, but like what's actually happening, the nose doesn't go right. The tail goes left.
Yeah,
which makes you go right. So what can happen? I've had a lot of students do this. If you're not on the center line, let's say I'm hugging the left side of a taxiway and I want to turn right. That tail swings out to the left when I want to turn right. So you can take that tail and slap a taxiway light. So normally in a nose wheel plane, if you turn, that plane follows that turning path that your body is experiencing. On a tailwheel plane, your body turns tighter than the tail. The tail takes a bigger radius, so you can hit things and not. So you have to be aware of different things on the outside of your turn as well as the inside when you're turning.
Yeah, that's the good point that I hadn't thought of. And also you're always telling me to stay on the center line, so I guess that makes sense. And then the other two differences, I don't want to go into all the details in this episode unless you really want to, but takeoffs and landings are slightly different. Takeoffs, I guess, are not that much different, but landings can be different. Like there's two different types of landings, whereas in a nose wheel, there's like one style of landing. Like, yeah, there's variations for like short field, soft field, but it's the same style, mains first. And then
and the takeoff, the one big thing I actually have some students, they struggle with, and this is part of the landing struggle with too. So on takeoff, you push down before you take off. And I have a lot of students who don't, that just goes against everything your brain wants to do. And when you push down, you also hit one of those left turning tendencies, the gyroscopic precession that they teach you in ground school for private pilot, but you never see it. So but that push down, it makes your plane turn left, but you have to push down so you can gain speed before you take off. And that's kind of the difference in takeoff. And yeah, the landings, I said you can land on all three wheels, like a 3-point landing, or land on just 2 wheels. So that there's there's 2 variations of landings you can do, which is just something in addition you have to learn compared to a nose wheel plane.
Yeah. The 3-wheel landings to me feel almost like the like landing in a nose wheel, maybe slightly higher altitude.
Because they're both full stall, right? When you teach them to land in a 172 standard nose wheel trainer, you're teaching them to do full stall landing. The moment the wheels touch the ground, the wing is stalled.
Sure.
That's what you're doing with a 3-point landing.
But yeah, a wheel landing feels very different.
Yeah, because a wheel landing, you are flying. You fly the plane to the ground. At any given point in a wheel landing, you can take off again. So on a wheel landing, you fly the plane to the ground, and then once the wheels touch the ground, instead of continuing that flare, you actually push down, push the plane into the ground. So that's, a very awkward thing if you've never done it before.
Yeah. Okay, good. So now we have like an idea of how these two planes are different, not just like visually, but performance-wise. So when planes first came out, or not the first ones had skids, but the early planes generally had tail wheels. And then at some point in around like the 50s, it seemed like there was a big shift over to nose wheel. You can see this shift in like the production of the Cessna 172 from the 170. It was kind of a quick changeover from the popularity of the 170 to the now like ubiquitousness of the 172.
It's very quick. They took tailwheel 170s in the factory and then made them 172.
So what was this change? Why is it so fast?
Yeah. It comes from, one of the reasons is when nose wheels were around, obviously nose wheels, as I said, are slightly more stable. There are some drawbacks to that, but they're more stable for a training platform, things like that, which is why they caught on so quickly. It makes insurance cheaper, things like that. But also you got to think at the time, around the 50s, is when aviation was transitioning to a lot more hard surface runways and taxiways and things.
Oh, that's a good point.
Right, that's the benefit of the tailwheel is the ground clearance. So back then it's just all gravel and grass strips. You really want that tailwheel, you want that ground clearance. But then 50s and 60s, people came back from the war. There's the investment in general aviation. Paved runways are now becoming way more frequent. That the lower ground clearance allowed with a nose wheel plane is okay. And people just wanted to have the people were just scared of the ground loop, and they didn't want to lose their plane, so Nosewheel caught on.
Yeah, and so that's why we were talking about, to this day, or at this point, virtually all flight schools, except for very little niche ones like ours, have fleets of almost solely Nosewheel airplanes. 172s and Piper Archers are the two most popular. Cherokees. So it's easy to think that Nosewheel is completely better, and that by owning these tailwheel airplanes, we are purposely going against progress. We're choosing to do something because it's cool and vintage, and not because it's actually better. But there is an argument that training in a tailwheel is actually better for you as a pilot, even if you do not plan on flying tailwheel planes in the future. Even if you never touch a tailwheel plane again, having first learned in one can be a big asset. So why do you think that? Like, I know you've told me this a couple times, and we had this discussion when we first started the company.
Yeah, so in general, obviously I have some students that want to fly tailwheel, and you fly tailwheel because you want the ground clearance, you want to be able to land in not pavement, right? That's just what you get. It's a little safer to land in not pavement. But I do have people that, I have a student right now that has a 172, they're going to do the Nosewheel thing, but the tailwheel really doesn't, it's like you're starting with the training wheels off. You're learning actual rudder inputs, not just jam right rudder the whole time. You're learning actual rudder inputs to steer the ground. You're learning crosswind correction, kind of trial by fire. I can tell you on 172, most flight schools nowadays, you're never actually going to have to put the crosswind correction to the test because they're now new systems. They don't let you fly if there's that much wind. Mm-hmm. So in reality, you're never actually having to put those to the test. As well as when it comes to landing, the dynamics and the physics of the plane as it lands and all that, you don't get a great feel for on the Nosewheel because it's very forgiving, especially 172. Very forgiving. You're not learning as much. Like, we say, it's so easy, it's a great trainer. But, at least our kind of philosophy is that you don't want it to be that easy. You want to learn the hard stuff first. So with a tailwheel, it really teaches you the stick and rudder skills, as they call them. So that being able to kind of combine graciously your stick movement with your rudder movements and making the plane do what you need to do on the ground usually creates a much better pilot in the long term.
Yeah, and for an example of a way that I improved. So I did all of my training in a Nosewheel airplane, and then I did the last 75 hours or so in a tailwheel plane. And the biggest change that I've noticed is I'm way better at crosswind correction on landing. So when I was training in the 172, every single crosswind landing I did was like this. I would crab down, and then right before the runway, right before I was about to touch, just straighten it out, get it as straight as I could, and then land. Which in 172 is generally fine, because even if you land a little bit cockeyed, it's not the end of the world. Because it's inherently stable, it will straighten out on its own. But in a tailwheel, if you land like this, like we talked about, that's a recipe for a ground loop. And so Matthew's helped me a lot with this. And so now I'm pretty good at doing the actual correct, slipping into the crosswind, so that you land with one main wheel down and one wheel up, but critically keeping the tail wheel between the two and not letting it ever venture out outside of the mains.
And another thing to that, why it can also be more challenging, is that when you land, even a normal landing on a tricycle gear plane, you're on the runway. The moment you get on the runway, because you're level, that wing is near zero angle of attack. You're on the ground, you're not flying. Tailwheel plane, even just sitting on the ground with a gust of wind, because the tailwheel plane, the way it's squatted on the ground, always has angle of attack. So we teach it's always flying. You can be just taxiing slowly, but if you get a strong enough gust of wind, you might get enough lift for that wing to fly. So when you land a tailwheel plane, it's not there's no definitive stop flying part of the landing when you hit the ground. You literally have to just fly it the whole time. And I think for students, that's a better mindset to be in. And the tailwheel really forces them to have that mindset.
Yeah, that's especially true in the Tailorcraft, a light fabric plane. Yeah, we always taxi it very slow for that reason, because it feels like, it's not true, but it feels like if you go a little too fast, it'll just take off.
Because the angle of attack, even at 10 miles an hour, the air going over the wing is taking a lot of weight off the wheel, so you are losing control.
Yeah, that's true. So when you first got your CFI license, you did all of the training up to that point in a Nosewheel plane, right?
Yeah.
So what did you have to do to prepare yourself to become a tailwheel first instructor?
Yeah, so I when we bought the plane, I got paired with this old guy at the at our airport. He gave me all the instruction for free. He just wanted to see another tailwheel pilot. It was really nice because he took us in our plane. And I did a little more than just the standard, tailwheel indoors. So I flew with him for 10 hours with him. And he kind of showed me all the things, and more so not even just the tailwheel endorsement and just like the flying, also some more like kind of tips and tricks you learn about tailwheel flying that you would learn just by doing it. Like one of the big things I teach is that if you're turning like a nosewheel plane, if you get stuck in the grass or something, you might kind of power over it. You don't do that in tailwheel because you tip over. Like more like kind of real. I learned a lot from him. And then after I flew with him for 10 hours and got the endorsement, then I flew for another 10 hours after that with myself, just landing, crosswind, left, right, everything, wheel, 3-point landings. And then after that, then I taught you tailwheel for the longest time. Then I started teaching our other brother for a little bit. And that kind of built up the skills so that I could start actually taking on tailwheel students from scratch.
Mm-hmm. And so how, you had to, when you first become a CFI, you have to create a game plan, right? A lesson. So have you changed that for tailwheel students? Obviously you have to include tailwheel endorsement in there somewhere.
Yeah. So, I mean, if anything, normally when you fly, go to flight school, you solo pretty early on. It's pretty early on in the progression, but obviously if you're going to solo, you need a tailwheel endorsement. So we start with a tailwheel endorsement first. I don't really care that they know about airspaces. I don't really care that they know about, random private pilot stuff. I only care about muscle memory flying the plane, like riding a bike. I don't even care if they know what the instruments do that much. We're just doing the tailwheel endorsement. I just want them to be able to do proper rudder input, takeoffs. And one thing a little more challenging we do, because tailwheel endorsement involves takeoffs, crosswind landings, 3-point landings, 2-point landings, taxi in a crosswind. So they have to show all that. So it does take some time. Typically, they solo a little later on because it takes so much time to build up those tailwheel skills. But because we spend the time building the tailwheel skills, once they solo, they're effectively check ride ready flying wise because it took so much effort to build in. But their stick and rudder skills are so ingrained, like deep muscle memory connections, that all the maneuvers and stuff for the check ride just come easy. So it's very much we go tailwheel endorsement first, but by the time they're ready for me to sign them off the tailwheel endorsement, I could probably endorse them for the check ride as well. They get that proficient that quickly.
Have you actually noticed this? I know you've had some nosewheel students and tailwheel students at this point. Have you actually noticed that the tailwheel students have better stick and rudder skills?
Yeah.
I guess in general and also in the first, pre-solo?
Yeah, without a doubt. Because I've had one of my tailwheel students, we had to get some night currency done, and I didn't have access to a tailwheel plane that could fly at night. So we just went in the local flying clubs. It was a nosewheel plane. And we just went in it, and I wanted to see if this was true. So I just let him fly. I didn't tell him anything. He landed it perfectly. And then he flies other planes now that are nosewheel and lands them just fine. But if I take a nosewheel plane pilot, they can't do the same. Does that make sense? So I really do believe it builds that stick and rudder skills, and it builds that feel of landing. When you land a nosewheel, if you learn from a big flight school and you learn a Cessna, it's just very much speeds and very rigid. But with the tailwheel, it's much more of a feel thing. You feel the sink and you feel the float, and you look long and you feel the angle in they call it the Lindbergh reference, your left and right references. And it's a lot more of a feel thing that I think actually just goes a long way, literally all the way up until flying jets, like a long way in your pilot progression. My very first time in the Dutch, the landing was nothing because I'm used to, with the wheel landings, just trying to land so smooth that it progresses to any other airplane.
I'm going to ask you about the Lindbergh stuff, but later, because I have not heard of that.
Yeah.
But so when you had that student who had been training in a tailwheel and then did a flight in the nosewheel with no instruction, did you say anything like, hey, this is going to feel just like a 3-point landing, or did you just let him figure it out?
Typically I say a 3-point landing, right? They want to feel that full stall landing.
Okay. Yeah. And then another story about my own personal training. So I was saying that the area in which I've most improved is crosswind landings, for sure. But then also like Matthew was saying, a lot of times during your PPL, you learn to do things very strictly by the book, following speeds. And judging the strength of a crosswind is something that I have a better feel for. So yes, I do look at the windsock, but my main judge of a crosswind is just how much do I need to slip in order to keep the plane straight. Whereas like when I was training, I would look at the crosswind, and then there was like a little like picture in the ground school that if the windsock is like this, it's 5 knots, 10 knots, 15 knots. And then I would like try to figure out, okay, how strong is a crosswind? I'm going to need to roughly do this, when you don't need to do all that, right?
Yeah, one of my, this is actually like this guy from the YouTube channel 74 Gear Kelsey, but he talks about it that if you're on final, you should never really be asking for a wind check from ATC, because look at the runway. Are you able to keep it? Right. You're already there. You can feel it. If you don't do any corrections, you're going to push to the left. Okay, you got to cross them from the right. So yeah, very much it gives you that feel. Another feel thing I kind of don't agree with is big that when I had some instruction help at the flying club, I was kind of told, and I really agree with this. So rotation speed isn't really a thing in small airplanes. It shouldn't be. It's for like jets. For small airplanes, you fly when the plane's ready to fly. Right. And so pretty much any like student pilot from one of these big flight schools does not have a feel for takeoff, to where in the tailwheel plane, you get the full power, you push the nose down, you kind of feel when it gets light, and you get good at that feeling. You can really start to get some real short field performance out of the plane when you get like a really good kind of sense of when the wing feels like it's loaded and it's ready to take off. And that's a feeling that just isn't taught anywhere else. It's just when you hit this speed, you can take off.
Yeah, that's true. In both of our planes, like once you're giving it like forward pressure to keep the main stuck, you start to feel the plane fighting you a little bit, like little vibrations, or you're having to add a little bit more pressure to keep it down. And it's kind of like the idea, okay, this plane's ready to take off.
Feel the ground effect a lot more.
Yeah, that's interesting. So one thing that I had never done before my tailwheel endorsement that I think you've incorporated into all of your students is fast taxiing.
Yeah.
So what is that, and why do you do it?
So I do a few variations, but it's just taxiing at like a higher than, basically taxiing at a speed that wouldn't be safe for taxiing. We do it on the runway. We go to a place with a long runway, 5,000 feet, wherever we can find it. And I start with, when they first get in the plane, after they taxi around the taxiways, I want them to feel how quickly that tail can get out from under them. So I'll go on the runway and we'll stay in the 3-point attitude, and I'll just add a little bit of power so they can feel that once you start going faster, you have to be faster in the controls, but you have a lot more control because you have so much air over the tail. And I want them to feel that relationship between airspeed and control over the tail. And once they build the that speed up, what we start doing is I work the power, they just work the controls. I give it enough power for that tail to start to come up. So I let them start. We taxi fast enough to get the tail up. And once the tail's up, once the tail's up and you're going fast, you gotta kind of have a lot of control. You got all that wind from the propeller over the tail, you have a lot of control. But then I reduce power. Now you have no air over the tail, but the tail's not on the ground. So you have no tail wheel steering and not really any air over the tail. You barely have any power at all. So now they feel that relationship between wind over the tail and air over the tail and control. And then they have to kind of wrangle the plane down. And then once the tail wheel is back on the ground, get the plane back under control. In doing that really prepares the student. For a lot of students, do great with the first part of the landing. Very quickly, they catch on to getting the plane on the ground. Where most ground loops happen is the deceleration phase, where you're on the ground and you're decelerating the plane to a full stop. A lot of people kind of stop flying the airplane, and that's when the ground loop happens. That's when you're losing that airspeed, so you're kind of losing the control a little bit. So that these fast taxis, the speeding up and slowing down and all that, really prepares the student for the most critical phases of flight when it comes to tailwheel flying. So they don't ground loop the plane.
Yeah, that moment is actually kind of scary to me still. It's like once you know how to do it, it's not very difficult to control it. You just give more inputs until the tail wheel is on the ground with pressure. But it's definitely a very unique feeling to have like such great control, and then all of a sudden it just gets like kind of spongy and decays to nothing is a good way to put it. Another thing we've had to add to the training is ground loop management and ground loop prevention. So like tips and tricks and practices that we do to prevent ground loops from happening in the first place. And if one begins, how to manage it and minimize damage. So how do we prevent it? What's the first thing?
So obviously, one for preventing it is one of the main things. Also, when you land, you make sure you're not on any brakes. On the tailcraft, very easy. The brakes are heel brakes. You just off of them. On the 170, you got to make sure your feet are down on the pedal and you're not touching the rudder or the brakes.
But why are brakes an issue?
Because if you brake on one side, brakes have a lot more turning force than just moving the rudder back and forth.
Okay.
So if you brake on one side, it'll lurch the plane over. Also, if you brake on both, you'll tip the plane over and prop strike.
Sure.
So you just stay off the brakes.
So like even if like you might not know it, but you might be putting slightly more pressure on one brake than the other, and that
exactly.
Okay.
But yes, the ground loop. The really biggest prevention is in my training. I really have a don't give it an inch mindset. I don't really allow sloppiness in the tailwheel endorsement. Like I demand perfectly center line. And obviously, I'll have a student that is everything's doing great, and they'll kind of get frustrated because like I'm doing all these landings, it's great, but every landing they're just kind of snaking back and forth down the runway by like 4 inches. I'm like, that's fine, but what a ground loop happens is that you give the plane 4 inches and it takes 20 feet, right? And you ground loop off the runway and you lose control. So kind of my thing is just super low tolerance when it comes to accuracy of like keeping the nose where it's supposed to be. And then I also teach, and I've luckily been fine, just ended up in the grass a few times with some students. But if a ground loop is to develop, one of the best ways to get it is you just have to commit to it. So if you're going down the runway and a ground loop happens, suddenly you're not facing down the runway anymore, you're facing somewhere else. If you commit to going to that new direction, oftentimes you can find yourself back to a controllable state. You're not going to get going down the runway again. But let's say I'm going down the runway, the plane ground loops, but now I find myself pointing into the grass field to the left of the runway. You can usually regain control of the aircraft, and now you're just going that way. If you just abandon the original heading, you're fine. But if you fight with brakes and stuff to keep the original runway, that's when you get that really quick snap ground loop, and that can happen. So a big thing is just knowing when you've lost it. And a big point of knowing when you lost it is knowing when you lost it, reduce power. It doesn't matter what happens. You are not taking off again. It's not going to happen because there are many crash videos of people getting close to ground loop, taking off, and they stall and spin. Really like tragic accidents. So a big thing about ground loop prevention is just staying super tight tolerance, is not letting that nose get out of control. And then obviously I'm not going to go ground loop the plane, but I show my students videos and I have them prepared. This is what a ground loop is going to look like and feel like. If you sense this, there is a time where you just have to know what's happening. And if you just pull the power, accept it, and just go the new direction the plane's going, regain control, you might crash the plane, but you're probably going to be fine. But if you add full power, jamming brakes, trying to stop it, that's when some worse things might happen.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I remember when you first explained that to me, that theory about like commit to your new direction, like this is your new straight, because it makes sense. It's not 100% true because you still have momentum in the runway direction, but if we just ignore that for 1 second and we think, okay, so if our plane's now like this and the runway is straight ahead, then our tail wheel is clearly outside of the mains. But if we define our new straight to be over here, then maybe the tail wheel is still inside of the mains in the controllable
still
region.
recoverable a little bit,
And so like I said, this is complicated by the fact that you have momentum moving down the runway. But like Matthew said, you pull that power because a ground loop does not have to be damaging, right? You can, like we've done it for fun. Like when you're
ground loop at 2 miles an hour, you just spin around.
The plane just spins around and nothing breaks and it's fine. So if you can pull power and reduce that momentum, you can have either a completely recovered ground loop, or if it does become a complete ground loop, hopefully you've already lost enough momentum in the wrong direction that it's not going to damage too much.
The thought is that, and if let's say the plane gets out of under you, you lose it, and you're going off the runway. Fine, but if you can get it back under control, maybe hit some runway lights. You're not going to hit some runway lights. It's not the best in the world, but it's better than if you get a real high speed where that tail snaps around on you. You're dropping a wing. You're dragging a wing on the ground. You may be flipping the airplane.
And you'll end up in a direction. Who knows?
This is like almost an extension of an old like Bob Hoover thing of in crashes you have to keep the wing flying. Is just keep the plane under control. Like whatever it takes. If you keep the plane under control, there's always going to be a better outcome than just completely losing control of the airplane.
That's right. And an extension of this, like you were saying, you're very strict on your students about maintaining center line and staying straight. So one little note I'll adjust is that like when we're coming down on final, Matthew is very, very like get on center line, get on center line, and on takeoff as well. But once you're on the ground, if you are not on center line, you do not try to like turn to get onto center line. Wherever you landed, that is your new center line, right? Because that
until you slow down, you can get back on.
Until you slow down. Because while you're going fast, that adjustment to center line could be the adjustment that causes a ground move.
Yeah, but what I basically do is I have my students, if the landing isn't going to be on center line, we go around. Because there's no use. Yeah, that's the thing. If you land off center line, I don't want them punching rudder when you're maybe in the uncomfortable zone where you don't have a ton of control. So I really just don't really let them learn the habit of landing off center line, because you're right. Once you've landed off center line, you're now gonna, to get back on it, purposely induce a lot of lateral movement that could create a loss of control situation that we just don't want to happen. So yeah, it's one of those things where we just don't let it happen, because if you land off center line a little bit, you kind of have to wait till you slow down a little bit. I mean, I can get it back on center line, but I don't want a new tailwheel student trying to do a high-speed lateral movement.
Sure.
Yeah.
With just having this conversation and thinking about tailwheel stuff, like I started learning in a tailwheel with around 175 hours. I cannot imagine being like a brand new student doing a tailwheel endorsement as my first entry into flying. But I'm seeing the success of our students with you as their instructor, and
yeah, it works. I would say,
I'm surprised, but
if you're the type of person that's going to be like, I need a solo at 10 hours, it's not for you. It takes like 20 or more. But at the end of that 20, you're almost track ride ready, because you've learned the stick and rudder skills so well. But it's just the nature of the beast. You gotta learn the muscle, like riding a bike. You gotta learn the muscle memory to do it properly.
Are there any other things you want to add about training?
No, I just say one of kind of the benefits, I would say, in my personal opinion, is fun.
I was just about to say that. Yeah.
Why would a student never choose if it's so hard? It is more fun to do. It feels like more of a sport undertaking than such a business undertaking. And what it allows, they said the one benefit of tailwheel is the landing in unimproved fields. And here in Florida and stuff, we have a lot of grass fields and stuff. And that is the benefit, is that you get to land in places you probably couldn't land on a Nosewheel. So that's kind of the benefit. There's some minor speed benefit, but not really. But yeah, the benefit, in my opinion, is the fun, is being able to, like, the flying even on bigger or long runways is just kind of more fun, do the 3-point the wheel landings, and the ability to go take a bigger plane like ours and land it in somewhere like our 170. You can carry 4 people if you want, and you can still land it pretty short on some gravel strip somewhere. It's like I like that ability.
Yeah. In a really good buttery landing, a tailwheel feels very satisfying.
Yeah, and
it feels great.
It feels good, and the prop clearance is nice to know you have when you're landing on grass and stuff. Because like if I had a nice new like 182 or a nice new 172 instead of a 170, I would think twice about some of the places I've landed on tailwheel planes, because your prop is 6 inches off the ground.
Yeah.
Where here your prop is like feet off the ground. It really doesn't matter. I know I'm fine. I can, Valkyria, I can taxi through the ditch to get to the grass just fine. I know it's going to be fine. So I think it's fun, and it allows you to do more stuff with the airplane, which is like, in general aviation, that's what it's all about. It's doing more stuff with your airplane.
And along those lines, we do, what's the term I'm looking for? We do want our students to do this kind of thing. Like, a lot of flight schools do not allow students to land on grass runways, or if they do, it's under like very strict circumstances, where we actively train on grass runways. Our renters can fly into grass runways. Obviously, that we do like a little bit more extensive checkout process that involves a tailwheel endorsement. But yeah, it's a lot more fun, and if you're going to be getting into this, you should be able to enjoy it.
Kind of how I say is, there are some things. How do I say this? A tailwheel plane can do everything a nosewheel plane can do, and a little more. A nosewheel plane cannot do everything a tailwheel plane can do.
Yeah.
Right? If you want to, you can buy 170 or 180 and outfit it with all the IFR, avionics, autopilot. You can do all of that.
Yeah.
But you can still go land in some places where the nosewheel will just break off. Right? So that is really I want people to experience tailwheel flying with that in mind, is that this machine was made to fly at certain areas. You should go fly certain areas. Like, it's no fun if you're just flying tailwheel, but all you're doing is flying to 6,000 foot 7,000 foot paved runways.
Right.
So like it's not the point of the plane is to land it in 2,000 foot grass strips. So that's kind of the whole thought behind that.
Will Olinda Aerospace ever own a Nosewheel airplane?
I don't know. Like
Maybe.
it depends on what the mission is. Like to be honest, eventually I really like the multi-engine flying. I'd like to get into it.
Yeah.
I would love to own a multi-engine tailwheel plane. It's just your options are relatively limited. There's a few seaplanes that are like that. Like a Beech-18 would be effectively, and that's a huge trainer. And if it's going to be a trainer or it's just going to be more of a transport thing, I don't know. Probably the next thing I feel like Olin Aerospace would do would be a seaplane, like realistically.
Yeah. I think that counts.
So I'd like amphibs. So it's 4 wheels. So I don't know what that counts as, but for now, no. It's just tailwheel is the fun thing. I said you can do everything you need to do in a nose wheel, and there's some added risk, but as long as you just get proper training, you can mitigate it as best you can.
Yeah. And one last thing. So Matthew's saying the next thing might be a seaplane. Basically, our idea is that each plane that we get should add like a new feature to our training. It should not just be like a generic plane that we're just getting just because, right? We got the 170 because it opens up like more cross countries to our students, more like overnight trips. Whereas if we bought like a 172 right now, it wouldn't add anything on top of the 170.
Yeah.
So we really like the tailwheels now, but maybe we'll end up with a nose wheel down the road if that opens up a new opportunity.
Yeah, like one thing I could see is maybe like a high performance, right?
Yeah.
Like because like nowadays with like FADEX and the TAA planes, a lot of people aren't flying those standard old high performance complex planes like an old Bonanza or something. So like I could see that being a market maybe. But
yeah,
who knows?
All good?
Yep.
All right, let's land the plane here. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for listening to The Wing Wag. If you liked this episode, please consider subscribing. And if you're out flying today, make sure to give somebody a wing wag.